I, of course, first want to just thank everybody for being here. Obviously, a special thank you to all of our Wellstone members. But as well, I know we have a lot of non-members here tonight, so I got to start off with the pitch. You know, it's a very good club. We did a lot of good work. I'm appreciative to be a new member of the Wellstone Democratic Renewal Club. The sign up is only $15 if you're under 30. 15. You got a lot for $15. If you're over 30, it's 25. So it's just a slight tax, but we really appreciate you too. If you have interest in this event, if you have interest in obviously the esteemed guests that we have and the speakers we're going to have here shortly, please think about joining. But again, it's my true pleasure to welcome you to the first in-person Wellstone meeting in how long, David? Pandemic. Since the pandemic started. So I want to thank you all for being here. Yeah, my name is Nathan Mizell, again, new Wellstone member, Wellstone CC member on the coordinating committee. I've done some work in, criminal justice, police accountability myself, and we have really esteemed panel of folks who can speak to those issues and a whole lot more tonight. So without too much further ado, before we get fully started and fully going, I want to turn it over to David for just a quick announcement. And then at the end of the meeting, after the panel, we're going to have a quick vote on some bylaws. So for the folks in, I saw your face, Pamela, but don't worry. We're going to have a quick vote on that after the panel. But for us getting started, I want to hand over to David for a quick announcement and we'll get things rolling. Thank you, everybody.
Hi. Welcome, everybody. My name's David Weintraub, and I'm also on the coordinating committee, and I also encourage anyone who's not in Wellstone to join up. We have a lot of good committees and activism, and we combine that activism with electoral kinds of work that we do and try to connect the activist community to the electoral community. I guess it. Without it. And it's organized by Google and Amazon workers, and it's No Tech for Israel advertised. So please join this demonstration. It's a really important issue. So. And this is going to be at the Moscone Center at 5 o'clock on the 29th.
Okay, another quick announcement. You may know that the city of Oakland passed, thank you, passed an ordinance banning coal in Oakland, and that we're being sued, and the trial is going on now. And we're all very concerned that the city may waver and make some compromise. So we're going to have some of these signs in the back of the room at the end of the meeting. So if you live in Oakland, please take one. We're going to have window signs. We're going to have long signs. Please put them up, because basically coal dust kills our children, and it is really unhealthy for the city. We need to make sure that we hold on this. The second is I'm wearing the hat of getting the dinner ready for our October 15th anniversary. And this club needs to be very proud that we're the only club that does consistent mailers for progressive candidates on the major elections. And that's not an accident. That happens because we raise money. And one of the ways we raise the money is to have these annual dinners. So we're going to have the annual dinner October 15th at the Asian Cultural Center. I'm getting to go to the food, so I promise you the food will be really good. But we need you to buy tables, to bring friends, and to take out ads with Pam. Everybody in here who was ever a candidate, that includes me, that was endorsed by the club, should buy an ad and to thank the pioneers who started this club and has kept it going for 20 years now. So thank you.
Thank you to the former mayor of Oakland right there, folks. Thank you. Yeah, so Without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to another one of our esteemed panelists and our moderator for tonight, Ms. Leslie Rose. And let's welcome our beautiful, powerful, and really getting the important work done panel. Let's get started, folks.
I'm a appellate public defender and a retired law professor. I'm going to begin by introducing our panel for this evening with the caveat that I'm going to introduce our panel for tonight with the caveat that these introductions will not do them justice. They all have extensive and impressive accomplishments that would take too long to list here. You can learn more about them by clicking on the links in the email announcement for this meeting. So to begin with, Chesa Boudin is the founding executive director of the Criminal Law and Justice Center. At Berkeley Law, he served as San Francisco's elected district attorney from 2020 until his recall in 2022. Prior to his election, he clerked for 2 federal judges and worked for years as a deputy public defender in San Francisco. Pamela Price is the current Alameda County District Attorney. She was elected in November 2022, and she is the first African-American to hold that position. She began her legal career as a criminal defense attorney at the Bayview Hunters Point Community Defender's Office in San Francisco. She then opened a private practice handling a variety of cases and becoming a nationally recognized civil rights attorney. Christine Soto DeBerry is the founder and executive director of the Prosecutors Alliance. She began her legal She began her legal career as a public defender in Los Angeles. She also served as Mayor Gavin Newsom's deputy chief of staff. She then served as chief of staff to George Gascon when he was the San Francisco district attorney, and continued in that role when Chesa Boudin was elected. So I'm going to explain how we're going to proceed tonight. We'll begin with a discussion with the panelists based on questions posed by me. We'll then turn to audience questions. So for folks in the room, you can get index cards at the sign-in table, and they will be collected by, who's collecting them? Can you raise your hands? By Pamela and Rivka will come around and collect them. And for those of you on Zoom, we'd like you to put your questions in the chat, and Nathan will be reading them as well. We ask you to wait until the end of the panel or close to the end of the panel so that he does not have to sort of flip through pages and pages of chat messages to find them. Okay, so what we hope to do tonight is to shed some light in an area on a topic that has generated a lot of heat. The movement to reform our criminal legal system is not new, but it's gotten some increased attention recently. Part of that movement has been the election of prosecutors around the country, starting around 2016 in places like Philadelphia and Chicago, prosecutors who self-identified as being part of the reform movement. And like many social justice movements, it has faced backlash, manifested by recall attempts, attacks on bail reform, calls for harsher punishments, and increased funding for police. It even came up in last night's Republican debate. So we're going to address some of these issues, and we will also, of course, talk about recall elections, past and present. So let's begin by defining what we're talking about here. What do we mean when we use the term progressive prosecutor? How does that differ from a traditional prosecutor? So maybe, Christine, we can start with you, and you can also tell us a bit more about the Prosecutors Alliance and why it began.
Great. It's exciting to be here in such a full room of people interested in this topic. And I know many of you here supporting the Alameda DA Price. And so it's really great to see you all. Alliance of California is a nonprofit organization designed to support reform of the criminal justice system by activating prosecutors to bring their voice to that conversation. We don't believe that everybody in the profession supports a tough on crime approach. And these two champions are great examples of that people within the profession can stand up, not just for safety, but for justice and equality. We work around the state with elected prosecutors, helping them identify legislative and policy reforms that advance both of those goals. We started in 2020, so we're a relatively new organization. DA Boudin was one of our founding members, DA Price, one of our newer members, and we're growing rapidly with over 4,000 members around the state. That's both prosecutors, victim advocates, and community members, allies in the community that think it's important to raise law enforcement voices that support reform. So we welcome you to join us in that effort. You can find, it's free. You can find information on our website. But I think that what is really important here is to break apart this false belief that we can either be safe or we can have justice. And that is a lazy response to what needs to happen. And people that are asking the hard questions, starting with community members that have seen the criminal justice system the closest, the communities most impacted by crime and victimization, are the loudest voices telling us that what we have been doing has failed. And the courageous people in this work, DAs like DA Boudin and DA Price, are asking the right questions. They're not suggesting every answer is immediately available to us, but they are unwilling to accept and repeat the failures of the last 50 years and expect a different result.
Their concept of what it means to be a progressive prosecutor. Sure.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me? It is great to be out here tonight, isn't it? Come on, isn't it great to be here? And it's not just because it's a beautiful night. It's not just because we've got an amazing panel that I'm honored to sit alongside. It's also because I'm looking out into a room full of beautiful faces, and I recognize so many of you from so many different areas of this work, people who I know have been in the trenches, on the front lines, literally for decades. And so it's great to be in community with all of you, thinking about these issues and how we can fight for the kind of communities and the values that we all deserve to live in and that we all want to raise our children in. I want to be brief in this answer because I think there's a lot we could say and we will say over the course of the evening. On a fundamental level, what progressive prosecutors want is safety and justice, to Christine's point. There's a recognition that we get those things by thinking more creatively and more intentionally than has been done in the past. It's a recognition that simply talking tough and advancing what's called retributive justice has not succeeded in making our communities safe. It is not, as Christine said, a choice between safety and justice. In fact, I deeply believe that every single reform we implemented in my administration and that the progressive prosecutor movement and the criminal justice reform movement champions will and are designed to make our communities safer. The problem is the status quo is failing to do that, failing to make us safe. And so when we talk about things like police accountability, or when we talk about things like consumer protection work or expanding victim services or diversion programs, that is not about being soft on crime. It's about being smart. It's about being proactive. And it's about using evidence-based practices to not simply rely on years of incarceration as a metric for how much justice we are administering.
On. Can you hear me? Ah, there it is. Hi, everybody. I'm Pamela Price, your district attorney. I'm also a proud Wellstone member, so I want to thank Wellstone for doing this. But and I joined Chesa. This is a great community, and we are all here tonight to come to solutions and to talk about what is our path forward, because we took a huge step in November of 2022. We stepped forward, and now we have to keep stepping in that way. I often said to you all on the campaign trail, and continue to define myself as a minister of justice. And what that means is that I am prepared, as Christine has said, to reject the status quo, to reject the failures that have led us, that have made us unsafe, that have decimated communities. And fundamentally, I am not hesitant to call out the racism in the criminal justice system, which makes a lot of folks very uncomfortable. And so there's a lot that we will share with you tonight about this movement, where we've come from, how it got here, how we got here, and where we go forward. So thank you all for coming. This is beautiful. Thank you.
Hear me? Is it working? Okay. So none of you began your legal careers as prosecutors, and we hear critics say that public defenders can't be effective prosecutors because they're trained to represent criminals. Can you respond to that criticism and talk about how the skills you've had in your different roles transfer or inform your work as a prosecutor? And maybe also talk about why you switch sides, so to speak.
Let me just say that you never, ever hear those same smart aleck critics asking questions about prosecutors who made a living and built their career sending poor Black men to prison, who switch sides to make money defending rich fat cats who steal from the public. Never ask that question, right? Where's that question for those folks? Literally get their trial skills, build their reputation, prosecuting poor young men of color, sending them to prison, destroying their lives and their communities. And then when they decide they want to make some money, who do they defend? People that look just like me. The reality is there's a reason why people like Donald Trump hire defense attorneys that built their career as prosecutors. And it's the same reason why people like the wise voters of Alameda County elected someone with a new and fresh perspective to come and lead the district attorney's office. Because having a different perspective is critical if we're going to succeed in making change that does something different than repeating the same mistakes for decades and centuries. The reality is, if you understand how defense attorneys or civil rights attorneys or mayors think about problems, you can be a far more effective advocate and leader of an office like the district attorney's office. There are lots and lots of people who have spent their entire careers as prosecutors, and they have value to add to these offices, to be sure. And it is critically important to also bring in other perspectives, outside perspectives, to understand how the other side thinks. If you're going to negotiate a plea deal, if you're going to implement a policy in partnership with other agencies, you need to be able to see things the way the person across the table from you sees them. It's critical in any area of life. We all know that intuitively. And that's why these sorts of criticisms are so unbelievably, to use Christine's term, lazy.
What I find the most problematic about suggesting people that have done defense work are not well suited for prosecution is that prosecutors' responsibility is to represent the entire community, including the person accused of a crime that is in the courtroom at the moment they are prosecuting the case. That is a member of the community. So it seems to me a huge value add to have some actors in the system that have seen both sides of the courtroom. I can say for myself, having done both defense and prosecution work, that I have learned from both sides of that. When I did defense work, I had very close, intimate conversations with my clients about their lives and their struggles and the things they needed to be able to flourish. That was invaluable to me to understand not only how to represent them in court, but what better solutions to the problems might look like. The number of times I was in court saying to a prosecutor, jail is not going to fix this problem, I mean, I could have just started with that in almost every conversation I was in, because the issues that the people I was representing were bringing forward were issues of not having resources, struggling with mental health issues, not having solid housing, so many issues that jail was only going to exacerbate. That understanding was incredibly valuable to me in moving into prosecution. And when I got to prosecution, I had an opportunity to understand what it was for victims, people that had been harmed, and get a better understanding of that. It made me an exceptionally well-rounded, capable leader. I wouldn't trade a moment of either of those experiences. And I think there should be more people in this system that have done both sides of the work, because you can have empathy and understanding for more than one person. Anybody in here a parent? Yeah, I have 2 kids. I love them both dearly and equally. I don't have to choose one or the other. In the same way, we do not have to choose whether we care and support a victim and at the same time care and support the person that harmed them in doing better. We can do both things. This safety and justice, either or, this victim or a person that has caused harm, either or, these are false choices they're putting in front of you to suggest that we can't walk and chew gum. We're smarter than that. We're more capable of that. And in an evolved democracy, we should be accomplishing that.
So I can speak to that lie because I was a civil prosecutor. I spent 30 years representing victims in their worst moment and understanding that the job that I had to do, the success that I was compelled to reach for every day was absolutely essential. And I had to do it without the resources of the state. You know, I didn't have it easy. When I walked into a courtroom, I didn't have the power of the state behind me. I didn't have a big office and unlimited government funds. We had to scratch and beat out every victory. And at the same time, standing in the gap for people, for everyday people, is the orientation that I can bring to the criminal prosecution. And as Christine says, it's not one-dimensional. I have to have the best prosecutors have to have a 2-dimensional lens or a multi-dimensional lens. And when we talked about in 2022 and today, justice with compassion, we're talking about compassion for everybody who is impacted by the criminal legal system, whether you're the person that caused harm or the family of that person who caused harm. Because how many times have we seen families whose loved one did something absolutely crazy and unacceptable, and yet they are thrown under the bus with that person too? Versus, and at the same time, the people who have suffered harm and their family. And so we have to be able to have a holistic view of it and to balance the whole thing. That is the job of the prosecutor. And I refuse to adhere to a one-dimensional lens, because that's why our system is failing. Because we don't understand that someone can be a victim and a perpetrator at the same time. Because we don't understand how communities engage and interact across the board at different times and different stages. Because we're not looking at what is impacting the behavior of the person who is still a person that has come into the criminal justice system. One of the most frustrating aspects of the position that I hold and that we're trying to transform is that people are not considered people. You know, I get summaries every day. The victim, the defendant. Do they have names? Hello. How old is the victim? How old is the defendant? Do they know each other? What are the circumstances that resulted in perhaps this horrible thing happening? And usually it is a horrible thing. It is damaging, not just to the person who died or who was injured, but to their family, to their neighbors, to the witnesses, to the whole community. And unless you have a lens that compels you to look across the board at how everybody is being impacted by this thing, you're not going to be an effective prosecutor, not in my view.
So I'd like to expand on a bit talking about victims and the concept of justice for victims and the families of victims. And in particular, there seems to be a notion lately that justice for victims relates to punishment, and the notion that the only way to get justice means charging the highest possible crime with the longest possible sentence. And there was, I think, a rally last weekend on the steps of maybe Oakland City Hall with victims' families sort of yelling for justice. And what they meant was, we want longer sentences. So can you talk about that and what justice for victims looks like from your perspective and the role of a prosecutor's office in terms of victim services?
The people that came out last week weren't just saying longer sentences. They demanded that we charge juveniles as adults. That was at the heart of that protest. That because we have said we will not charge and convict and incarcerate juveniles as adults, those folks disagreed. And my response to that is not where this community is right now. We voted overwhelmingly, and many of you worked on Proposition 57, okay? We understand that we must follow the science. And we understand, as Brian Stevenson said, that none of us want to be judged by the worst thing we've ever done in our lives. And for many of us, that was before we reached the age of 18. And so we're holding the line on that basic principle. Understanding that juveniles and young people and anybody can do a horrible, horrible harm to any family in this room. And as Christine said, we don't have to choose between how we hold that young person accountable and how we help that family heal. Because what has been lost in the conversation for so long in the criminal justice arena about victims is healing. We're just starting to have a conversation about restorative justice. And for so long, for too long, prosecutors and media have weaponized and exploited vulnerable victims and used their pain for a political agenda. And we're not going to do that anymore in Alameda County. And so as a prosecutor, I understand that the tool that I have, particularly in Alameda County, is something called victim witness advocates. And one of our first priorities when we got there was to increase the number of victim witness advocates, because there's studies that show nationally 80% of all victims in the criminal justice system don't get help. They don't get services. But in Alameda County, we're trying to reverse that. We hired more victim advocates. We hired more diverse victim advocates. We hired our first transgender advocate. We hired people who speak the language of the communities that are impacted by the crime. And we are committed to doing that. We have the opportunity as prosecutors, we receive funds through the state of California. This year alone, we have paid and provided compensation to victims of almost $650,000. And we are constantly trying to increase that and recognizing most victims, the person who caused them harm in Alameda County does not get arrested. Our homicide solve rate in Oakland is terrible. And so we're dealing with folks who have been victimized, who have suffered a horrible loss, and the criminal justice system has no remedy whatsoever for them, except for us to be able to provide trauma-informed services, counseling, grief, because grief needs support and needs healing. It does not need the furor of the political battle. And so that's where I think we've gone wrong, or what has gone wrong in that area.
Add one thing, that there have been a lot of surveys of victims and survivors of crime. And the thing they want more universally than more punishment is they want themselves to be safe, and they want no one else to suffer the same experience they did. And that, I think, is the clarion call for prosecutors, is to think about, how do I avoid there being a future victim? And we started on this conversation in this country in the 1970s. It's as old as I am, that we have been saying, we think prisons are the way we will keep people from getting hurt. The problem is 50 years later, we know that that is not true. It fails almost 70% of the time. If this were the medical profession, you would not agree to that treatment. We are professionals, we are lawyers, we are steeped in an education, and people like DA Boudin and DA Price are leaders in that conversation. It is appropriate and incumbent on people that are leaders of this conversation to be honest about the failures of prison to solve the problem or to heal the unimaginable wound of losing a family member. Prison will not heal that wound. It may provide some solace in a moment, and we can respect and appreciate that the person that has lost their loved one is irreparably harmed. But the criminal justice system has an obligation to be independent of that pain and to think about a solution that will prevent it from happening again. And that is the most important work we can do. That is the work we all hope the system will do, is ensure that we're all safe. And the best way to do that is to look at what interventions work. And so when victims are coming forward and saying, I want more punishment, it is a really hard conversation to say, what we have learned is that more punishment leads to more violence. That's hard, but it's honest and it's the truth. And I have enough respect, and a lot of us have enough respect for people that have been that deeply harmed to have an honest, caring conversation about what we can and what we cannot do. And so as painful as it is to watch people grieving in those moments, lying to them does not make it any better.
I want to make one technical point that's very important. And then I want to talk a little bit about the different visions that progressive prosecutors have for victims' rights and victim services, and the more traditional prosecutors who call themselves tough have. The first thing, the technical point that's very important to remember, and that often gets glossed over in media coverage of these issues, is that district attorneys do not represent individual victims of crime. I'm not saying that as a criticism. We could talk, we can go over to Berkeley Law School where I work. We can have an academic conversation about the pros and cons of different approaches. This is the way the system works all across the country and always has. Elected prosecutors represent everybody. Christine made that point earlier. They represent all of the people. That's important to understand, because sometimes people say, I'm a victim. Why aren't you doing what I asked you to do? You're my lawyer. No, we are the lawyers for the people, all of the people. And as understandable and relatable as it is in a moment of pain and unimaginable loss to cry out for vengeance, something that our culture has instilled in us for generations, it is not and should not be the role of the elected district attorney to give voice to that most retributive anger in a moment of pain. That is not the role of the district attorney, and it should not be the role. Individual victims can and do get their own lawyers. There's processes in place for that. Madam DA Price is not that lawyer. She has to do justice for everybody in the community, whether they're directly involved in the case or not. That's an important technical point. Now, let me just say a separate piece about the very, very different visions for victim services that the progressive prosecutor movement has and the traditional prosecutors have. It was not so long ago in the Alameda District Attorney's Office that in order for a victim of a violent crime to get access to whatever meager victim services existed, they had to first commit to full cooperation with prosecution. If they did not want to come testify for any reason, fear for their safety, inconvenience, missed work, whatever it may be, they would be refused all victim services. That's how much the status quo cares about victims, but it gets worse. Because in Alameda County, like in so many jurisdictions across this country, if victims don't want to cooperate with prosecution for any reason, prosecutors use material witness statutes to jail them, literally to put victims of domestic violence, survivors of rape, witnesses to murder in cages. That's how much they care about victims. Think about that for a minute. That's the status quo vision. There are decades of experience that people in communities like the ones represented in this room have with prosecutors talking a big game about victims' rights and then jailing people who have themselves been victimized to force their compliance and testimony in court. That is not victims' rights. That is not victim services. The progressive prosecutor movement, the campaign I ran on, the agenda that I implemented from day one was a victims first agenda. And you see it in the work that DA Price has already succeeded to implement in just a few months. This is work that requires us to think much bigger than just which handful of cases police make an arrest in. Let's be clear. Let's take auto burglaries in San Francisco. It's in the news today. 99% of auto burglaries never result in an arrest. 99%. So what kind of services is a traditional prosecutor offering to those victims? Homicides unsolved. Residential burglaries in San Francisco, more than 90% go unsolved by police. So if our only vision of what victim services look like is vengeance meted out on the flesh and body and livelihood of the individual responsible, then 90% of victims under the status quo approach get nothing. Our vision is a broader vision that recognizes the need to heal every single person who's been harmed by crime, regardless of whether the police make an arrest, regardless of whether they bring us enough evidence to secure a conviction, and regardless of whether or not an appropriate consequence looks like time behind bars or something entirely different. And I see people in this room who are doing the long-term work of building out those kinds of alternatives, doing the services, trauma-informed care that does not depend on effective police work, which is sadly in short supply, that does not depend on building more jails and prisons, but rather on building more schools and educators and healthcare facilities, on investing money in actually providing things that heal harm, not simply tell people to be satisfied with vengeance.
So let's talk a little bit more about the police and working with the police. There was a recent story that in Portland, where there's a progressive DA, that the police chief had to tell his officers to stop telling complainants that there was nothing they could do because the DA wasn't going to charge anyone. We've heard about similar things happening in the Bay Area, and we also heard about a lack of enforcement during Chesa's time as DA. Maybe in, to try to undermine his job. So how important is it working with the police, and how do you get beyond some of the tensions that might be there in that relationship?
And I know that that Christine and DA Price will have more to add, but at the end of the day, whatever form of justice you believe in, whether you believe in diversion programs and restorative justice, or whether you believe in lock them up and throw away the key death penalty for trespassing kind of justice, district attorneys cannot do anything along that spectrum unless and until police do their jobs.
That's really the whole thing. We cannot prosecute an empty chair. We cannot divert an empty chair. If there is not somebody brought to the prosecutor's office, there is nothing for them to do. And you heard a few of the statistics. I worked in San Francisco DA's office for over a decade. In 2015, the solve rate on auto burglaries is the same as it is now, less than 2%. And we went to the police department and said, we need you to do better. The community is demanding more from all of us. We need you to do more arrests so that we can act. We're prosecuting what you bring us. You're not bringing us anything. And we suggested investigative strategies. We even set up a tip line and let community members upload their cell phone videos. And we passed it on to the police to say, maybe this will help you solve the crime that you're saying we're not prosecuting. There's a ton of finger pointing going all these directions happening right now in your county. The most effective deterrent to crime is certainty of being caught, right? Think about it. If you knew you could walk into a store and walk right out with all the stuff 99% of the time, and you were inclined to do that, you feel like pretty good odds. If on the other hand, you thought 99% of the time you were going to get caught, you're not going to do it. It is like really, it's not even complicated. You don't have to know anything about the criminal justice system to know that. That is instinctive in a human being. Like, no, that's not going to work out for me. I'm not going to do that. So if we are worried about crime, as many of us are, and we spend our days thinking about this, and we want to see less crime and more vibrant communities, and we want police to be a part of that, then that is the most important role they can play. And they undermine that recklessly by saying they aren't going to do their job because the next person might not do theirs. Imagine if any of the rest of us did our jobs that way. Like, not today, because Sally, who you don't know and may never see, might not do her job. So I'd rather just not do mine. It is inexcusable. They are being paid to do the job of patrolling communities, of making arrests, and then for DA Price's office to decide what to do about that. And that is where the more balanced, deliberative conversation takes place, as is appropriate, right? She has lawyers in her office that have the time to sit down and look through the report and think about, is this the right person? What should the consequence be? That's a valuable deliberative process. But at the moment that somebody calls and says, there's somebody breaking into my car or breaking into my house, the role of the police in that moment is to make an arrest, to write a good police report, and to bring it to DA Price for her decision. That is not currently happening in many parts of the county because people are busy trying to make a political point that we shouldn't change anything and we're going to break it so that we can prove it doesn't work. I just don't subscribe to that. I think we're public servants. We take that job seriously. I think most people take that seriously. And when you hear somebody saying they won't do their job because other people aren't doing theirs, I would ask more questions.
She's absolutely right. I hate to tell you though, it's not happening in most parts of the county. It's happening in Oakland. And it is a strategy. I heard about it years ago in Cincinnati when they went, my hometown, when they went under, the Cincinnati Police Department went under consent decree. They said, oh no, that's where the blue flu came up. When I walked for Chesa to get him elected, I heard residents in San Francisco say, we're not arresting people. We can't do that because the DA is not going to prosecute them. It has been reported to me over and over again by elected officials in Oakland that OPD people are saying, officers are saying, we can't arrest anybody because that DA is not going to do anything. But y'all know when you call 911, I'm not rolling out, okay? I'm not the police. I'm not the mayor. Hello. I'm a district attorney, which means, and in Alameda County, that means I have 14 cities. And justice should not look different in Oakland than it does in Fremont or Newark or Union City or Castro Valley or anywhere in this county. My job is to make sure that there is fair and just prosecution if there's going to be prosecution, which at this season of our history, there's going to be prosecution just like there's going to be police. And I have met with all of the police chiefs in this county, and I have said to them from January at my first meeting, I am not here to tell you how to do your job. And I do not expect you to tell me how to do mine. Okay? Let's be very clear. And I have had wonderful direct conversations with many of the chiefs. Some have taken it better than others, but it's okay because I'm still going to do what you elected me to do. This strategy of saying, I don't have to do my job, it's exactly what Christine said. And that's what I've said to each one of the Oakland officials, including the Oakland OPOA, which I met with about 30 of them. You are getting paid. You're a public servant just like I am. Don't tell me that you're going to get paid, but you're not going to do your job. I don't have the luxury of saying that. So how dare you have the luxury of saying that? What I've also said to the Oakland Police Association and the leadership of that department, telling people that you are not going to do your job for any reason creates a danger to public safety because you are encouraging vigilantism. And we are not having that in Alameda County. So y'all need to get it together.
So let's talk also about accountability for police. One of the motivations for electing progressive prosecutors was a promise to hold police accountable for the misuse of force. What kind of challenges have you had in addressing accountability for law enforcement who commit crimes? Okay, loaded, huh?
Give you a chance to. So when I was working in San Francisco in 2015, I don't know if you recall, but we had a huge racist text messaging scandal, right? We're seeing it now in Antioch. And at the time that that happened, DA Gascon wanted to do an investigation. And when we went to the mayor's office and said, we need resources so that we can bring in more lawyers to help us go through all of the cases, we were not given any resources. We had to bring in law students to help us go through 4,000 cases that were implicated by the 19 officers. And that cascaded into a much bigger question for us about who is watching the police if we're not being given the resources to do our part of the job. And that's at the lower end of things where people are sending offensive messages, not to mention where they're pulling weapons and discharging their guns at people. There is a litany of hurdles to accountability around law enforcement. They have mostly been unquestioned until prosecutors started coming into the role saying, part of my job also is to hold police accountable when they cross the line. And community has been clamoring for that for as long as I've been alive, and very loudly for the last decade or two. And finally, all of us are paying attention to that question and trying to support the election of champions like the ones I'm sitting next to today. But that accountability work is incredibly difficult to do. There's legislative hurdles to it. We've tried to pass a better law. The law in California used to say, if somebody was accused of 1 of 4 felonies, you could shoot them while they're running away. We just changed that in the last 5 years, right? Because we had a case where somebody was shot in the back and we thought, how could that possibly be okay? And the law in California was saying that might be okay. So there are real hurdles to it. But the most important thing I think around police accountability is having a backbone and standing tall on the belief that accountability applies to everybody and that nobody gets any special breaks because of the job they have or the relationships they have. And it is very hard to do in prosecution because you work every single day with the police as your partner. It is very hard to look at the person that you rely on for your casework coming in to now say, like, this over here is a problem. But some people are able to do that. These are 2 shining examples of that. DA Gascon in Los Angeles, DA Becton in Contra Costa are incredible examples of people who have stood tall and said, when you cross the line and your force is excessive, I'm going to be here to say no. It is something we all want to see. It corrodes public safety when we don't do that accountability work. It is why people do not call the police, right? People do not trust the police. I have been a victim of many crimes. I have never called the police. Never, not once did I call the police because I didn't think they could help me or make it better. That is not good. That is not good for society. That means crime goes unaccounted for. That means people who have caused real harm are not held to account. So it is not just the accountability work of saying to the individual officer, you have harmed somebody or taken a life. It is that core part of creating a system that people actually can trust and lean into when they need safety and protection.
It's really easy to sit here and say that nobody's above the law. Really easy to say it. To say that nobody should be above the law, that we want to live in a world, a democratic society where when people, no matter what color their skin is or how big their bank account is or what uniform they wear to work, when people commit crimes, there are equal consequences. But we know that's not the world that we live in. Never has been. And the fight to get there is going to be an uphill battle. As Christine said, the obstacles are far too many and too detailed and complicated by design to hash out tonight in this setting. There's a great book. If you all are interested in reading more about this, it's called Shielded. It's a new book by a professor out of UCLA Law that looks at the history of qualified immunity and how courts over and over and over again have whittled away at what few civil remedies there are for accountability when law enforcement crosses the line. At a high level, there's basically three theories of how we deal with police officers who do wrong. One is internal discipline within the department. They get fired, they get reassigned, they get demoted. We know that never happens. As a matter of fact, I was talking to somebody earlier this week from the Oakland Police Oversight Board, and apparently every single one of the recommendations they've made for discipline has been overruled by the police chief. Every one of them. So much for civilian oversight. This goes back even before. So the second path is civil prosecution, the kind of cases that Madam DA Price used to bring. And with qualified immunity and with all of the different hurdles that have been built up around discovery and around police not actually paying out of their own pocket and police departments not actually paying out of their own pocket, even in those few cases that do result in some kind of a settlement, we know that path has been almost entirely closed. And so the only other available path is criminal prosecution. In those few cases where there's enough clear evidence of what actually happened, video footage, multiple eyewitnesses, where there's some chance of doing a meaningful investigation, and the hurdles to bringing those cases, even assuming we all could agree that that's the right vehicle in a particular case, are, I'm not going to use the word insurmountable because we filed some of those cases, but they feel insurmountable when you're doing the work. And, you know, part of the challenge is you have to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. You have to have evidence. You know, some of the details people forget about. When I got elected DA, I had people in the community saying to me, when are you going to bring charges against the officers who shot Mario Woods and Alex Nieto? When are you going to reopen the Luis Gongora Pat case? And one of the things that again, you know, I'm coming from a law school, I'm going to be technical here. The way that a criminal case is initiated, the formal technical way that a case is initiated, I can be the district attorney, Madam DA Price sitting next to me could say all day long she thinks a criminal case should be filed in this, that, or the other particular instance. But guess what? It doesn't work that way. You need an arrest warrant to be written by a peace officer and to be signed by a judge. You need a grand jury indictment to be signed by the foreperson of a grand jury. It is not just the decision of the person sitting in front of you today. And I will tell you that there are peace officers who refuse to investigate other peace officers. And this was such a major problem when I took office that we did a couple things. One was we actually recruited investigators who we knew were committed to doing this work, and we sent them to the police academy to get trained so that they could have the qualifications to do these investigations, to write these arrest warrants. And we did another thing. We did this in partnership with Christine in a big coalition. We changed state law so that an arrest warrant in an officer-involved case could be written by anybody in the DA's office. A lawyer, a paralegal, a non-sworn investigator, because before that, you literally needed a police officer to agree that there was probable cause to arrest another police officer. And let me tell you something, it wasn't happening.
He's absolutely right. The hurdles, well, let me back up. I want to commend everyone in this room because you all demanded that in Alameda County, we have police accountability. So thank you for that. Thank you. Because you demanded it, we are actually leading the country in the number of open case reviews of officer misconduct. Because you demanded accountability, My predecessor actually charged a police officer who killed Stephen Taylor. And that movement, that prosecution continues. When we got there, that prosecution was sitting on a shelf, gathering dust, hoping that one day we would all go to sleep and forget what we saw, and that there would be no need to prosecute that officer. But we took that case off the shelf. And I want to highlight that case because that's a very, very important case for Alameda County. It is our first real effort since Oscar Grant to hold police officers accountable for in custody deaths, to have an officer charged with homicide for killing someone in a Walmart on a Saturday afternoon who he did not have to shoot. We have taken that case, we are prosecuting that case. And when we talk about the hurdles, one of the fundamental hurdles, first, there was a motion by the defense to disqualify me because I am a member of this community. And I know I was part of the Stephen Taylor protest, shall we say. That failed, okay, because I can be fair and I can do my job and I understand the burden of proof as a prosecutor. The second thing that happened is also extremely unique. We had a prosecutor in our office, again, someone that was wedded to the status quo, that chose not a police officer, not an inspector, but an actual lawyer who chose to take confidential information that he had about that case and give it to the defense. He threatened the integrity of our ability to prosecute that case and of the judicial system. And then we did something equally unprecedented that we have not seen in this country. We charged Butch Ford. And anybody that tells you that I am soft on crime, you ask Butch Ford. Because I am all about justice, because I am about equal and fair justice. And Addie Kitchen, Stephen Taylor's grandmother, deserves just as much consideration and fairness as any other victim in this community, any other survivor. There are very difficult challenges. And I think we will get to talk about how the law has changed, how it has brought us further than we've ever been in terms of not just what the progressive movement has done, but what our legislators have done. People like Holly Mitchell and Shirley Weber, who I pay homage to because they fought for those changes. Brothers like Darcy, who was there on ground at the beginning to say these things have to change. And so those changes empower me as your representative in this criminal justice system to be able to hold police to the new standards. When I see a case, and my predecessor did me a favor, she closed a bunch of cases going out the door. And that allowed me to say, hold up, wait a minute, we're gonna take another look. And so we have. We are reviewing cases in the context, though, of the challenges that we have to be able to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Some of them are old cases. We may not be able to find the evidence. Some of them, one case in particular, I saw the video. I did not feel good about how the officers conducted themselves, but because the only actual video that would show the angle at which the person was standing when they first fired belongs to a news media outlet, and they refused to give us that footage, we may not be able to get justice for that family. And the reality is what Christine said. This is so important. The victim in that case, the survivor in that case, was a survivor of domestic violence. When she called the police that day, she never thought that the man that she loved would end up dead. And that case bothered me just like every other case, because I understood that if I am having a challenge with someone I love and I call the police and they end up dead, I carry that guilt the rest of my life. And when we found her and said, we're going to reopen, we're going to look at this case again, she said, nobody had reached out to her. She didn't know where the man was buried. She asked us, can you please put me in touch with his family? Because I know they blame me. I wasn't able to go to his funeral. I didn't think he would end up dead. And we were able to give her some relief. But I understood it's exactly what Chesa said. Nobody cared about the victim in that situation. And so you have to be able to have that lens and bring that to the work every day. And that's because of what you all did in 2022. That's what we're doing. We're going to continue to look at cases. We've got a case, Officer Tran, and we got those cases. We got 250 cases. It's a matter of resources. We have to pick and choose what cases we can open, who we can prosecute. I got a team of 3 lawyers. That's not enough. That's not enough. So we're doing what we can do and trying to partner with other resources, but you've got to have the resources to be able to really follow through on the cases and prosecute them. And Alameda County does not have that history at all, but we're changing it. So thank you. Too, so many of us have lived in horror at what is happening and has happened at Santa Rita County Jail. We have never had accountability for what happened at Santa Rita County Jail. And because we wanted that, we literally elected a new person in a primary and swept the right-wing person that we had out of office, just swept him away. And for the first time, we have actually charged 2 deputies in connection with the death of Vanetta Martin, who is our Sandra Bland. She died in Santa Rita County Jail, and we need to say her name, Vanetta Martin.
So let's talk about the recall now. And maybe get a broad perspective from Christine. Do you see differences in different parts of the state or the country? For example, Larry Krasner, George Gascon have been able to weather attacks so far. Is there anything we can learn from those examples and why we see recalls in some places and not others?
Well, we're seeing in 17 states across this country, there are efforts to attack progressive prosecutors. Do not think it is unique to Alameda or San Francisco. It is a concerted effort, like school board races, like denying gender affirming care, like ending critical race theory. It is a wedge issue that is being used around this country to divide people and to pull democratically elected officials out of office. And that is what's happened. It is also happening here, just like it happened in San Francisco. There was 2 recall attempts in Los Angeles. We're having recall madness. And nobody is exempt. What has saved people from being either recalled or losing an election has been community, has been voters saying, no, we elected this person. We elected the person because of those values, and we stand with her. That is what has shielded, that is the only thing that has shielded progressive prosecutors from being yanked out of office. Ron DeSantis has removed 2 prosecutors unilaterally, illegally, right? The DA in Tampa and the DA in Orlando have been yanked out of office and replaced by Republicans that have conservative histories and are opposed to reform. So this is the front lines of a long fight. You've all been in the fight, I'm sure, on a lot of issues for a long time in this county, just like I have. And criminal justice reform has become the new piñata for this conversation about whether we're going to live as equal citizens in this community or whether we're going to have second-class citizens and people that don't get the same rights. We're doing that all over the country. The thing that will save the conversation in Alameda is all of you. It is voters saying, I will not sign a petition asking me to recall somebody that I just elected into office less than 1 year ago. And it is saying, I will not vote to recall her from office because she's doing what I asked her to do, which is bring me safety and justice. And so this conversation, the benefit of this conversation is you all have the power in the conversation. This is not out of anybody's hands. There's a lot you all can do. The most important thing is to be talking to everybody you know about this conversation, is to be helping people understand that the newest person to show up to the criminal justice conversation is not to blame for the 50 years of failure you're experiencing. The first Black woman elected district attorney in this county is not the cause of crime in Alameda County. Give me a break. You all are the most persuasive people with your friends, your family, your neighbors. I don't know them. Chesa doesn't know them. DA Price may know them. But you are the ones that need to have those conversations clearly with everyone you know. That don't give me any excuses that you're hearing in the media, or you're hearing on Nextdoor, wherever you're hearing it. DA Boudin was in office for 2 years. When he was recalled, crime went up. Okay? It was replaced with a tough on crime prosecutor and crime went up. So you cannot recall a prosecutor and think you will recall crime. No, you will not. No, you will not. And so if you need to have that conversation, we're dealing with macro issues here. We're dealing with income inequality. We're dealing with poor public school infrastructure. We're dealing with a housing crisis. None of those things that people are experiencing in this county cannot be solved by any district attorney. Tough, smart, indifferent, none of them could solve it. The solutions lie outside of the criminal justice system. What DA Price can do for you is ensure that when people cause harm, there is accountability that allows for redemption and rehabilitation and reintegration. That's the role that she can play in this conversation. But to suggest that people are committing robberies now because there's a Black woman sitting in the district attorney's office is laughable. It is not what is happening. People are committing robberies for a whole range of other reasons. There should be accountability for that. We should not say that violence is okay. Nobody is saying that. DA Price is not saying that. No progressive prosecutor is saying violence is an acceptable response to your life struggles. The problem is not with the DA. The problems are macro, and the solutions lie with all of you.
So I do want to get to questions, but Chesa, we have to ask what advice you have from your perspective. Is there anything you would have done differently in your recall campaign? Anything we can learn from your experience as we start on our own in Alameda County?
I learned a lot in the 2.5 years I was in office, an awful lot. I was lucky to have people like Christine, who had been doing the work, for decades, who were patient and who, helped me along that journey. Some of the lawyers in the office. I mean, I presented a murder case to a grand jury. I'd never been in front of a grand jury before. Just thinking about how to do the job, how to wear the hat. It was a very steep learning curve. So a lot of lessons. I'm always available to offer advice if it's useful. Let me say one or two things now. The first one, and this is in part an answer to the specific way you framed your question for Christine. I want to just add on to Christine's powerful answer and say something that was very much encapsulated in Christine's answer, but I want to put a very fine point on it. The reason that there are not recalls against people like Kim Foxx or Larry Krasner is because they don't have recalls in the statutes or in the Constitution in those states. They're doing every other thing, as Christine said. They're summarily removing people from office. In fact, in Illinois, they so disliked State's Attorney Foxx that before she announced she was not running for re-election, a Republican legislator actually introduced a bill in the Illinois state legislature that would have allowed recalls in one county in Illinois. One county, guess which one? In Pennsylvania, where DA Krasner is in office, the Republican-controlled state legislature actually initiated an impeachment proceeding against him because of alleged dereliction of duty. Meanwhile, there was a Republican elected prosecutor in a different county who was being criminally prosecuted for rape while in office, who they didn't think was worthy of an impeachment proceeding. You can't make this stuff up. And so the fact that they are recalling DA Price isn't a surprise to anybody. It is not a reflection of any decision she has made or has not made in the few months she's been in office. They registered the domain to recall me the week I was sworn in. It had nothing to do with crime rates or with decisions I did or did not make. So let's be clear that we all make mistakes. DA Price is going to make mistakes. I made mistakes. Would we like to go back and undo them? Of course. But that's not what this is about. And the more we remember that, and the more DA Price stays focused, laser focused on doing the job that you elected her to do, the better off we're all going to be.
So DA Price, and if you're not ready to share this yet, is there any strategy that you can share with us or any advice you have for those of us who support you and what we can be doing going forward?
We anticipated this, as they have shared with you. Alameda County is not unique or alone. We joined the progressive prosecutor movement in 2017. We fought the first fight. We won the second fight. I call this the battle. I liken it to the battle where you have a horror movie, right? And you know you killed a monster once and you think you won. And then you know, people are celebrating and you look up the monster and it came back alive again. Oh my God. So we defeated the opposition, and I'm very, very grateful for that and humbled by that. And I am laser focused on the job. I have to be laser focused on the job because it's a very challenging job. It's challenging in many, many ways, and there has been a learning curve. I do feel like I was uniquely situated for this because in representing victims and survivors for 30 years, I knew that most people wanted was that it not happen again. They wanted to make sure, can you do, Attorney Price, can you do whatever you can? I just don't want this to happen to somebody else. So I came to the work with that orientation. I came to the work understanding how to manage people and solve problems. I didn't expect this office to be quite as different as it turned out to be. A lot of problems. And if you haven't read our 75-day official transition team report, check that out, because we laid out all the things that were not there when we got there and what we've been trying to build. And I shared with you today a list of the things that we have done in just 8 months, which, given the obstacles and the lack of a soft landing when we got there, is actually quite incredible. My main message to folks is exactly what Christine said. It is community. We cannot let people divide us, because that's what they want to do, is use fear and racism and hatred to divide us. And we as a country, we know we are divided. But this community has to come together. That's the only way we're going to solve our problems. And I believe that's how we will survive this effort to overturn the will of the voters, because that's really what it is. And so what our ask is, yes, talk to your family, to your friends, host gatherings like this, speak out, write letters, get on Nextdoor. I apologize, but I need y'all to get on Nextdoor. We got to have conversations with people, rational conversations that are not driven by fear about what is really going on. Yes, there is a surge in crime, but as Christine says, and Chesa said, it has nothing to do with my election. I have not been able to destroy the entire criminal justice system in 8 months. Not really. Tell people decline to sign. Decline to sign. That's really the message. I mean, we cannot go backwards. We stepped forward. We have a lot to gain by taking care of people who are who have been harmed and taking care of families and taking care of children. My administration has prioritized doing outreach to our children because we know that those who experience violence and trauma at a young age are most likely to repeat it, that it pollutes our community, not just their life experience, but it impacts all of us. And so that's really what we are doing, is to reach out as much as we can. And I have an excellent team. I mean, y'all see me, but I really am standing on the shoulders of some really outstanding lawyers and victim witness advocates and, activists who have done the work and who are here to serve this community. And so we're going to keep on doing what we have to do on the inside and show you how a transformed criminal justice system can look like and how it can impact the community. We're just at the beginning stages of that transformation. And so tell people, as someone said in a thing, give her a chance. Why don't you give her a chance? Because they wanted a recount. They were shocked. They were so busy after my brother. They were so busy looking at what was going on over there and attacking him. They didn't see what was happening over here. So they missed it, right? They missed it. But Alameda is not San Francisco. We don't look like San Francisco. I don't look like Chesa, okay? We are much more stronger, and I love San Francisco, but I love Alameda more. And I know that we can defeat this if we just do the work. And it really is about, we ran a grassroots, corporate-free campaign. We got to do the same thing. So thank you.
So I have a big pile of index cards up here. I won't get to all of these questions. And Nathan, people can be sending questions to Nathan through the chat. So I'm going to start with a really easy one for Pamela. Are there lawn signs yet?
No.
Okay.
It is not real yet.
Okay. That's
The
right.
fight has
right.
many stages. And let me just say this. They filed a petition, a notice. I filed an answer. That answer now has to be printed on pages and has to be vetted and accepted by the registrar of voters. That process could take 10 days. It could take 30 days. Until that process is complete, there won't be any signatures. They need, if they get past the requirements of the law, and our charter requires that anyone who does signature gathering, Alameda County, in many ways is unique. We have a charter that has a provision for recall. That charter says anyone who collects signature in Alameda County must be a registered voter in Alameda County. So y'all know how in San Francisco, they've shipped people in from around the country. They can't do that here. And so that's why it makes it more important that we talk to our friends and neighbors, decline to sign, and don't, we want people to not go out and try to get signatures. Getting signatures is incredibly difficult. They need minimal 98,000 valid signatures. That's a huge amount of signatures, and they only have 150 days to do it, assuming that they qualify. So if people don't sign, they won't qualify. To know that you have 98,000 valid signatures, that means you have to gather, probably the estimate is 140,000 valid signatures. Okay, that again is a huge amount for a volunteer effort. If they're going to pay people, they have to pay them, and we should insist that they get paid minimum wage, that they get paid a living wage, that they pay payroll taxes, that they pay workers' comp, that they pay. And that's why it's estimated it's going to cost $10 million. And if they see us fighting back, who's going to put $10 million on the table like that? So fight back.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so first question from Zoom here. I'll try to condense it here, but they ask, in a kind of reversal of broken windows theory, which I know the panel is familiar with, and for folks who may not be, essentially it's this theory around the idea, which Zimbardo and his theory in Stanford, and this idea where when crime happens, so let's say I break that window over there, there's this thought process that if someone doesn't immediately jump in to stop the next window breaker, another window will be broken, another window will be broken. And we don't want to get into it, but essentially the whole study was flawed, which I know the panel knows as well. But getting to the question, in a kind of reversal of broken windows theory, some have been advocating for converting minor street level offenses and traffic criminal offenses into civil infractions. Would this be an idea part of the panelists' suggestions for criminal justice reform?
Let me just say a couple of things. I mean, one of the big differences between the progressive prosecutor vision for justice and the tough on crime, supposedly vision for justice, is that we actually believe in prioritizing serious and violent crimes. We do. And it sounds counterintuitive, right? But the reality is they're focused on trying to arrest people and send them to prison for property crimes, for drug sales, for quality of life offenses, for crimes of poverty. They're busy trying to criminalize poverty. And we're busy trying to say the crimes that have the most serious consequences for the people we accuse, that cause the most harm to the victims, are the crimes that need to receive the most resources and attention. And so to answer that question, to me, if we can have reforms that free up resources that are currently being absorbed or distracted for police, for prosecutors, for courts on the conduct that by definition causes the least harm, and we can use those savings in resources for the crimes that we're not doing a good enough job on by any measure, then that's a win. Now, obviously, with any reform, the devil's in the details, and you got to look at how you're doing it. But I will tell you, we have limited resources at every step of the way. Policing, charging, courtroom capacity, jail capacity, trial courtroom capacity. You name it, public defender capacity, social worker capacity, mental health diversion capacity, restorative justice capacity. Everywhere you go, there's limited resources. And so if we can take police and prosecutors off of jobs, like trying to reverse overdoses, or like trying to get people who are living in tents to move their tents around the block every other day. If we can use the limited resources more efficiently, I'm all for it.
I wonder if what you think the percentage of felonies versus misdemeanors is in most places around this country. Do you think it's 50% felonies, 50% misdemeanors, 20% misdemeanors? Yeah, what do you think? Right. So millions of people, right? In this country, 80% of what happens in the criminal justice system is misdemeanors, and 20% is felonies. So we're not addressing the violence, which is the thing anybody's going to be the most concerned about. And we're using the vast majority of the resources, the lawyers, the judges, the jurors, the probation officers, on misdemeanor conduct. That I don't think that's what taxpayers wanted the money to go to. Particularly when, as this question asks, there are cheaper, more effective solutions for accountability in misdemeanor conduct. In San Francisco, we started neighborhood courts where we empowered community members to be adjudicators. We said, we're going to train you in restorative justice and we're going to give you the cases. And you decide what a restorative solution looks like to the harm that happened in your neighborhood, because you care more about it than I do. I don't live in your neighborhood, than the judge does. She doesn't live in your neighborhood. You have to deal with the person and what he or she does. You address the problem. We saved money. We got through the cases within a month. We had over 90% compliance from people participating in that. And the money that we generated from that, we gave back as grants to the community to identify solutions that they wanted. Let's have a movie night in the park. Let's fund the little league team that needs uniforms. All the things that everyone in the community knew were going to lead to more safety. Those are so much smarter than handling a misdemeanor prosecution in the courtroom where it takes about a year in front of a whole bunch of people that are completely random to the person that's accused of the crime, who is at this point not even sure what it is we're all talking about 1 year later. We get lower compliance, victims are less satisfied, and we waste a ton of money. So those are the kinds of solutions that DA Price is working on here in Alameda, that DA Boudin worked on in San Francisco, because they're smart, because they reduce crime and they save your taxpayer dollars for the things we need them for.
We are definitely committed to bringing neighborhood courts to Alameda County. But this question, thank you, yes. The devil is in the details. Christina is absolutely right. We average in Alameda County about 70% of prosecutions are for misdemeanor crimes. And there's always, I'm understaffed, the public defender is understaffed, our programs are underfunded. One of the things that we have not touched on, which has a huge impact on the quality of all of our lives, is mental illness. And the folks that we see that could be subject to a civil infraction who don't have the ability to pay, or sometimes don't even have the ability to show up in court. And until we really have to address the whole issue and make sure that the devil is in the details, that we're looking at it across the board. You know, it's one thing to say, let's do this. But what we all have learned is what's the unintended consequence when you make that kind of a shift. And one of the things that we are committed to doing is to be thoughtful as we go about the business of transforming this system.
Okay, several people have asked this question, so I am going to ask it. Please respond to people accusing you of nepotism for hiring your boyfriend, in quotes, even though the same criticism was not made of DA O'Malley when she hired her relatives.
I could take that a couple different ways. But let me say the one thing before I get to it. I do not think that it is okay or it should be normalized for us to refer to a 60-year-old man as a boy under any circumstances. So that part was offensive to me. You are absolutely correct. There's a double standard here. The County of Alameda does not have a nepotism policy. It does not have an anti-fraternization policy. And I can tell you that my predecessor hired numerous members of her family, her sister. When we got there, her sister, 2 nieces and a nephew were there. They are still there because they were able, I have no reason to remove them from their positions. And there are probably some other O'Malleys there that I don't know about. Alameda County long has been a place where if you are a judge, your child could easily get a job there. That's an open secret that I have lots of employees whose fathers are judges. And so the kind, right. Well, Nancy O'Malley's father was a district attorney of Contra Costa County when she got her job as a DA in Alameda County. The person that they are attacking as my partner is someone who has been deeply committed to this movement, has been deeply committed to this community, is a big reason why we are all sitting here right now, because of the sacrifices and the tenacity that he demonstrated for years. Many people, as you know, who were elected hired their campaign managers. He was my campaign manager. He also, at the moment that I met him almost 10 years ago, was the founder of Men and Women of Purpose, which was the only reentry program in Contra Costa County that had access to the Contra Costa County Jail, that brought people home safely, that protected public safety. And so he has a deep and abiding commitment, not only to those who have experienced incarceration, but having worked with homeless people, having worked with folks recovering addicts. He brings a wealth of knowledge, of lived experience that is extremely valuable in this moment, because we created the first resentencing and reentry unit, because we have the mandate to resentence people under the new laws in California, and every district attorney in California has a duty to resentence people. And we said, when we walked in the door, and he's not the only person who I knew walking in the door. I came in the door with a powerful team of activists and folks that were committed to this victory. And we said, however, if we are going to, which we are, we're going to resentence people. And folks challenged me, what you going to do? Chesa did 1170D. What you going to do? I said, I'm committed to 1170D. I'm also committed to public safety, which means when we bring people home, we are really vetting them to make sure that they are coming home in the right spirit, with the right attitude, with the right preparation, with the right support. And so my reentry team, which he is a part of, has done an amazing job. We have brought home at least 25 people, and every one of them has been vetted by my team. And what that means is they go, and that we don't just look at what's on the paper. I have two people that go and look into your spirit and your soul, and make sure that you understand that Madam DA is not playing. If you coming home, we need you to come home correct. We are not bringing you home so you can engage in the behavior that however you got here. We're bringing you home with the responsibility that you are expected to be a responsible member of this community, a productive member. We are about housing, employment, and mentorship. And those two people have done an amazing job of providing that support to those who have benefited from the new law. And so I stand firm in my commitment to bring people who have the right spirit and the commitment and the dedication and the experience and the qualifications to do the job, regardless of my relationship.
Yeah, to our our next question. So I'm condensing questions here, but there are multiple questions for DA Price. And I think the panel could weigh in as well in terms of, I know we spoke earlier about juveniles and sometimes the call for them to be treated like adults. So there's been multiple questions about what do we do when juveniles do commit crimes, whether that's carjackings or more serious violent crimes. And what type of interventions can we have from the DA's perspective or other perspectives that can really impact safety positively in community?
Understand and acknowledge that young people do some bad things when they're young without thinking about the consequences. One of the things that I am focused on in terms of gun violence is getting people to understand that when you shoot a gun, a bullet does not stop until it hits someone. A lot of times people shoot guns and they think the bullet just evaporates. That bullet's gonna hit something, okay? So we have too many people with guns, and that's a real problem for me in this community, and we're too quick to use guns. A lot of times young people will have a gun, they think they have to have a gun, and then they'll use a gun without thinking that that bullet is not gonna stop until it hits somebody. The level of violent crime in this community is off the charts. It's totally unacceptable. And I fault my predecessor because she sat by while guns flooded this community. There was no effort whatsoever to deal with the proliferation of ghost guns, something that Chesa pioneered in San Francisco. And we knew that we would have done that. Somebody needed to do that before we got to this stage, and recognize we got here a long journey that you can go back to the crack epidemic. You can go back to the closing of mental and the lack of mental health resources and support. You can look at the fact that we divested out of education and invested in prisons. Okay, all of that is at play now, and we see the consequences. People who grew up without support, without, parents that they could look to, without role models. We got a lot of problems that happened over decades that we're now dealing with, not to mention a pandemic. So here we are now. As the district attorney, as I told you all, I'm not the police. It's not my job to go out and find somebody's child and bring them to justice. In Alameda County, when a young person is arrested by the police for whatever reason, the first thing that happens is a police officer calls the probation department. There is a 24-hour probation officer who mans juvenile hall. And they have a conversation about whether or not that person, that young person is going to meets the criteria to go into juvenile hall, or whether that young person should be released. That is a conversation that happens between the police officer and the probation officer. And they do not call me or anyone on my staff to ask us what we think about that. They make that determination first. They have their own assessment tool. If they determine that the young person needs to be incarcerated and they're going to admit them into juvenile hall, at that point, we are asked, what do you think about the charges? And we immediately have a time limit by which we then have to move to charge. And make no mistake, we have 7 locations across this county where we charge people every day with every kind of crime in the penal code. And so young people have a different process, but we cannot use a different standard for them. As prosecutors, we cannot charge anyone unless we believe that we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt to the judge that is looking at the evidence that the young person committed this crime. And what we had in the recent spate of carjackings and robberies, we had young people wearing hoodies and masks. We had victims who could not identify them. We had video that did not clearly show which young person did which, because each person is entitled to an individualized consideration and proof. And so it's not enough to say, well, there were 5 kids. Let's put them all in jail. That it doesn't work like that.
They did that case.
Right. They did that when Donald Trump wanted them to do that, but Donald Trump ain't in Alameda County. So what we have to do as a community, and there are organizations that I highlighted that do work with young people, and we have to invest in those organizations. We do have to invest in programs and jobs and opportunities and mentors for young people. I started a pilot project through our collaborative courts where we took, I think there was 8 young men who had been caught with a gun. First time felonies, first time arrest. They were facing felony charge. We took them into a pilot program, which is informally designated our gun violence diversion program, to see if we could mentor them and provide them with, partner them with mentors through Youth Alive, to show them how to function, how to be able to engage with their peers without a gun. Because that's what's happening. A lot of young people have guns because every other person has a gun. So the issue, as Christine alluded to, the issue of crime and how young people engage in crime and the things that they do is very, very complex. And it's certainly not something that my office has taken on to solve. The adjudication of young people, for the most part, is handled by the probation department. And if we want to figure out what is the appropriate consequence for a young person, we have to go through probation. The judges refer cases to probation. Probation officers do an assessment, they do an evaluation, they do the kind of background, not testing, but they look at what has led this young person to this space right now. How did they get here? What has been their personal history? And a lot of times it's about violence and trauma that they have experienced as young people that caused them to be where they are. So we get those assessments from probation, and then it's a collaboration between the judge who has the final say. There's one case at least reported to me where my deputies said, this young person should not be released. He represents a danger to public safety. The judge released him anyway. So we don't control that. We have a voice, but we have a less of a voice in juvenile matters than we do in adult matters. But we are committed, and every deputy who I swear in, we follow the Constitution. I'm not going to lower the standard, the constitutional standard for young people, and make it lower than it is for adults.
So somebody asked a question about bail reform. How do we get bail reform? Should bail be based on the severity of the crime, or no bail and ankle bracelets instead? Anyone have any comments on that?
I want to just start by explaining for folks who may not be familiar what bail is and how money bail functions in California. Money bail is a system that allows people who are arrested and accused of crimes to buy their way out of jail. Let's be clear about what that does and what it does not do. It undermines public safety because it allows people who are dangerous to get out of jail and go on and commit more crimes or cause more harm. It also undermines equal protection, the foundational principle that this country is supposed to be built on, because it determines who stays in jail and who gets out based on wealth, not based on risk. And so the work that many of us across this country have been doing, and Christine and DA Gascon in San Francisco were pioneers in this work. I was doing the work in partnership and often adversarially with them because we had a shared vision for a system that based pretrial, and I want to be clear, pretrial meaning you are presumed innocent. You have not been convicted of a crime. That based pretrial incarceration, not on how much money you had, but rather on whether or not there were ways you could be released to your community that were consistent with public safety. And if there are, what the Constitution tells us, the US Constitution, the California Constitution, that you must be released because you're presumed innocent. We cannot legally punish people until they've been convicted of a crime. And so, I was sitting in a coffee shop maybe last week when there was a report of a mass flash mob burglary at a Nordstrom's in Southern California. And the CNN headline on TV in the coffee shop said, critics blame bail reform. And they're showing all these photos of people running out the store with masks and bags full of purses and this and that. And I'm thinking to myself, well, which critics, first of all, which anonymous critics? And second of all, where is the ethical integrity of the journalists who are picking these headlines to simply blame a particular crime on bail reform with zero evidence or connection? Do we know were any of these people out on bail when they committed this crime? They didn't arrest any of them. We don't know anything about it because none of them got arrested. We literally, maybe they were out on bail. Maybe they paid bail, cash bail to get out. And maybe it had nothing to do with bail reform at all. I want to tell you a brief story about the failings of the traditional money bail approach, because we have a Victims' Bill of Rights in California called Marsy's Law. And Marsy's Law is named after a victim. And I saw some of the domestic violence prosecutors from the Alameda DA's office were here with us earlier tonight. I don't know if they're still here. Anybody who prosecutes DV cases knows this story, and anybody who does victims' rights work knows this story. As a matter of fact, it's such an important story that it's not just California that has a Victims' Bill of Rights law named after this young woman, it's states across the country. Marcy's law is named after a woman from California who was a victim of a domestic violence murder. The man who murdered her was rich, and he bailed out while he was awaiting trial, and he showed up uninvited at her funeral. And you can all imagine how her family felt about that. Money bail did not prevent that from happening, it enabled it. So when we talk about bail reform, this isn't about undermining safety. This is about lifting up fundamental constitutional principles and keeping our community safe.
Thank you. We've had kind of multiple questions relating to the relationship between the DA and the police. And one of them asked, is to ask for more police work also, sorry, excuse me, let me rephrase it. Just had it in front of me. You know, it always messes up right when you're trying to say the question. Isn't that great? But essentially to rephrase it, that, you know, there seems to be some level of tension between the DA and the police. And I guess in the ideal scenario, what would the relationship look like for the DA if you could have the choice? And how do you see the police best working and interplay with your office?
So I have said to every police group that I have met with, it does us no good to point fingers. You all should not point fingers at me. I'm not going to point fingers at you. As I said, I can't tell them how to do their job. I've had conversations where we recognize, I think at some point they have to understand and come to the realization that they are not ever going to be able to hire enough police to do the job the way they think they should be doing it. But they have to come to that realization, okay? And that's a whole nother conversation that we can have. I think, so I don't think the answer is more police. I think that police need to be able to do the job differently, and they're gonna have to recognize that and get to that. We won't have any tension. My thing is I both have sued police officers and represented police officers. I don't have a tension if you are following the Constitution. And that's basic. If you are doing your job according to constitutional standards, I don't have a problem with that. We need the evidence to come in a way that is credible, that has integrity. If you can't bring the evidence in that way, you should not be upset if we say no. I just recently embedded a prosecutor into OPD because that was the ask. And I was told that that had been done, the practice years before, but it had stopped for some reason a few years ago. So we embedded a prosecutor there. And one of the things that my prosecutors asked me is make sure that the person who you put there is not afraid to tell them no. And so I picked somebody who I knew is not afraid to tell them no. If you don't have the evidence, we're not going to be able to bring the charges. Because prosecutors with integrity don't want to prosecute the wrong person. Police officers with integrity don't want to prosecute the wrong person. They don't want to incarcerate the wrong person because they know, given the delays, given the lack of resources, given the fact that we have money bail, that whether you're guilty or innocent doesn't matter how long you're going to end up being in jail. And so they know that. And so if they are a person, an honest person, they don't want to put the wrong person in jail, which means they need to do the work. And that's all we can ask them to do, is to do the work. We can tell them what we are looking for and how we evaluate cases. And I have to do that with my prosecutors. What am I looking for? What is the expectation? What is the standard? What is the policy with respect to charging that I need you to follow?
Well, I want to thank everyone on the panel. I want to apologize. Actually, I should apologize first. I know there are so many questions. Unfortunately, we just don't have the time. But I want to give a true thank you to our panelists for being here today. Can we give them a round of applause? Very quickly. Yeah, I want to thank for our Wellstone members. I need you for 5 minutes, Wellstone members. I need you for 5 minutes, please. And yeah, I apologize for my nervousness. These are people who really inspire me with their work, and I'm looking forward to learning as much as I can from all of them. So, Wellstone members, I need you for a moment. We got a couple announcements, and I think one from the DA's team here.
I want to let people know that there will be a town hall for which Pamela Price will be our Madam DA Pamela Price will be the guest of honor in Fremont on September 13th. I will leave this flyer here if you want to hear Madam DA answer more questions. Camera, I'm blocking it. Stand up in front of the camera. Hi, camera. All right, we're going to have a town hall in Fremont on September 13th, and I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of it. It will be available in person and on Zoom on September 13th, and I will leave this flyer near the door, and you can take a picture in case you don't get a copy. Thanks. Bye.
Our next membership meeting for Wellstone is Thursday, September 28th. And the agenda is senatorial candidates.